In our last lecture for the week, we're going to dip into grammar, sentence boundaries, and sentence faults, which consist of sentence fragments and comma splices or run-ons. Have you ever wondered whether grammar really matters out there in the world? Few people that you talk to in the street will know what an independent clause or a conjunctive adverb is. And one doesn't need grammatical theory in order to write pretty well. But beware, people do notice grammatical errors. For example, in workplace correspondence. And when they do notice, they judge the writer very harshly. A common management complaint these days is that employees today can't even write an English sentence. The most commonly recognized grammatical error, well, that would be the sentence fault. A sentence fault is an expression punctuated as a sentence that is really something else. Can you identify the sentence faults in this passage? Read the passage aloud and listen for the glitchy sentence boundaries. How did you do? Well, the first read passage is not a complete sentence, although it's marked as one. Then there's another that's not a complete sentence. Then there's a long passage, which is actually two sentences joined only with a comma. Confusing. And then there's finally another bit of material that is not a complete sentence. Okay. To become a good writer, you must be a grammar expert. But surprise, you already are one. If you're a speaker of English, you've already mastered grammar. This is what allows you to generate and understand the language. Now, grammar theory, well, that's something different. It's vast and complex, difficult to master. But you don't need much theory. You can generate English without it. You only need a small amount to turn to in tricky spots. For example, wait a minute, did I just write a fragment? Well, you need to know whether that is a fragment and how to fix it. You'll find what you need practically in Faigley. In Chapter 32, you'll review grammar basics, such as parts of speech, grammatical structures, and so forth. In Chapter 33, you'll look at sentence faults, fragments, run-ons, and comma splices. Now, as we review these materials, we're going to select a very small number of items, only what you need. The requirements for a sentence, the correct ways to join sentences, and how to fix sentence faults. Now, before going any further, let's establish what we mean by a sentence boundary. This is a signal to the reader, a capital letter beginning the sentence, an end punctuation ending the sentence. Now, readers expect that the material within these boundaries will be complete sentences, and if they're combined, they'll be properly joined. Readers sense and resent violations of these expectations. They become confused, and the reading is interrupted. If your sentence boundaries are going to work, therefore, you need to understand the requirements for a sentence. Every English sentence needs to have a subject, usually a noun or pronoun, and a predicate, which is to say, a verb. Now, there are some tricky bits here. Not all subject-verb structures can stand alone, and some things that sure look like verbs aren't really verbs. Subject and verb structures must be correctly joined. These are where the errors come in. You can see that the different types of sentence fault are related to these sentence boundaries. A sentence fragment is a group of words punctuated as if it's a sentence, but it's lacking something, a subject or a predicate or perhaps both. A run-on is a group of words punctuated as a single sentence which overflows its boundaries and is really more than that. And a comma splice is a particular kind of run-on in which a comma all by itself and inadequately tries to join two things that could be sentences. To understand all this, we need to see that a clause has a subject and a predicate or verb, but not all clauses can be sentences. How about this? Jesus wept from John 11. This is a clause and a full sentence, but it's only 2 words. This is never a matter of word count. Jesus cared for the poor. This is an independent or main clause that can stand alone. Because Jesus cared for the poor, well, that's a dependent clause which cannot stand alone as a sentence. Okay, so you have a subject and verb that can't stand alone. Why? Well, not because you took anything away, but because of something added. Jesus cared for the poor because Jesus cared for the poor. What's the difference? The word because. And it's one of many words, if, since, whenever, although, etc., that makes a clause so it can't stand alone. We're only going through this because subordinating conjunctions often cause fragments. The writer doesn't realize that the subject and verb have been made dependent. Crowds flocked to hear Jesus, period, because he cared for the poor. Well, that second bit cannot stand alone and should be added to the first bit. And then there's the question of verbals, forms of verbs that function as nouns, adjectives, and modifiers. To recognize verbals, we have to go against our instincts. What do we expect from verbs? Well, the action of a sentence, right? Here's a sample. That is a surprising result. Where's the action? Surprising, right? How about this? Making a profit is our business. Well, making, that's the action of the sentence. But the verbs of these sentences are quite different, is and is. The most common verb in the language is to be, but it doesn't include much action. How are surprising and making functioning in this sentence? Well, as verbals, as an adjective or as a noun. So beware of verbals. A clause needs a subject and a verb. Notice it says verb, not verbal. Beware of verbals used as nouns or modifiers. These lead to verbal phrase fragments. The woman waiting anxiously in the hall. The SUV advertised during the Super Bowl. Verbals are not verbs, and they create phrases, not clauses. Getting a headache? Well, don't let this grammar stuff block you. Turn to theory only when necessary. Write your text, read it aloud, listen for rhythms and completeness, and if you find a sentence that feels or sounds incomplete, try to correct it by instinct. If you're uncertain, turn to vaguely. To correct your sentence fragments, consult the box on page 393. First, is it a fragment? Does it have a clause, a subject, and a true verb? Is there a subordinator? If so, is the dependent clause linked to a main clause? If not, choose your correction. Suppose you have a subordinating conjunction. Well, you can either eliminate it or replace it, although becomes however. Or you can add a missing element, for example, a true verb. The woman waiting anxiously in the hall becomes the woman was waiting anxiously in the hall, or connected to a full sentence. The woman waiting anxiously in the hall wrung her hands. Okay, now let's look briefly at run-ons and comma splices. All sentences must contain independent clauses. Independent clauses may be combined to form compound sentences, but incorrectly joined independent clauses interfere with comfortable reading, and they leave readers disoriented. Run-ons, or fused sentences, as Fagley puts it, jam together 2 or more sentences with improper punctuation. Comma splices are particular kinds of run-on which use commas alone to join independent clauses. Sometimes you'll want to join main clauses. To do this properly, use a semicolon or a comma and a coordinating conjunction, as we see right here. Now, what are these coordinating conjunctions? Well, they join items of the same form, noun with noun, clause with clause, etc. With commas, you can join independent clauses with coordinating conjunctions, and there are only 7 of them: but, or, yet, for, and, nor, and so. Boy, fans. Beware of conjunctive adverbs. These are transitional words which use the same logic as conjunctions. And means the same thing as also or in addition. But equals although or however. For equals thus or therefore. And there are many more. But they cause trouble because you can use them in compound sentences, but with a semicolon, a comma, and a conjunctive adverb equals a comma splice. You see, comma, however, workers, that's a comma splice. Now again, don't let theory block you. Write freely, then read aloud. Listen for awkward sentences that might feel sort of overstuffed. Fix them, if you can, by instinct. If you need help, turn to Fagley. Once you find a comma splice, you need to fix it, and you have 4 options. First, separate the sentences with a period, as you see here. Second, replace the comma with a semicolon. Third, use a true coordinating conjunction. Replace however with but. Fourth, subordinate one of the independent clauses, although consumers benefit. Well, what do you think? Is that enough grammar for 1 week? Notice we've skipped most of chapters 32 and 33. We've only isolated the bits you need to fix sentence faults. Review these concepts, trust your innate skills, and complete exercise 2 in text citation and sentence faults.